So I realized that yesterday's video talking about me making decks for you guys, making deck techs, if I want to do that, I should probably talk about how I build decks a little bit and just the process of how I've, at least so far, how I've learned to do that. I'm going to primarily be talking about Commander, but I will talk about standard, or sorry, not standard, modern. I'm not doing standard decks. So, but basically, if you didn't see the last video, I am taking any requests for building a modern or a commander deck. I will build one for you, build a deck tech for you, not actually like collect all the cards because that can be really expensive depending upon the kind of deck it is. And there's no limit on this right now, how many people can submit any of this. Just feel free to submit any requests. You can do it through Instagram or in the comments, though Instagram will be better because we can actually talk about it more, and I'll have the link down to my Instagram in the description if you want to DM me there for that. But that's basically, what I'm doing. Just let me know what kind of deck you want, and I will make it for you. And I'll talk to you throughout the process and make sure it's going the way you want it to go. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, just a refresher of basically everything I said in yesterday's video, I wanted to talk a little bit more about deck building, because I have done quite a few decks at this point. So I guess I'll start with modern decks because it's pretty easy. It's a lot easier to explain those. I cannot speak for some reason. So with a modern deck, I come up with a strategy. Usually the strategy can come from a certain card, because in modern you can have 4 copies of the same card in a deck. So a lot of times it can revolve around a single card, like the card Scapeshift, which is not the only strategy in that deck, in a Scapeshift deck, and there's a lot of different ways to make a Scapeshift deck. But basically with modern, I kind of start with a card first, I think, typically, or an idea, a very specific idea. But the way it's worked for me in the past, it's typically been a card. The deck is based around this card or a few cards that are revolving around a certain win strategy. And the entire deck, then I just focus on finding cards that can progress to that win strategy as fast as possible, because Modern's a much more competitive format. And that's pretty much it. Then once you get a lot of things, you get a lot of stuff, just like you do with any deck building process, really. You get a lot of cards, you balance it, narrow it down to what you think you need, balance it between the cards that you only want to have 4 of and 3 of. And then after that, you just go through and balance the mana base. That's one of the final things I do typically, just because you want it to be balanced based on the cards you have in the deck and the costs that you need. You balance the mana base off that, but you make sure that you don't want to not leave enough room for your mana base, though, with your other stuff. So it's complicated, and I'll get more into it when I jump into the Commander one, because I have more experience now officially building Commander decks from scratch than I do normal decks. So that's modern. That's generally how I build it. That's the order that I go through the process. Commander, it is similar, but it starts out different, and there's more steps. I honestly prefer the process of building a Commander deck, because Commander decks stem from an idea or a commander, typically. But for me, typically so far, it's been like an idea, like a win strategy, not a specific card, because if you don't know, Commander's a stack of 100 cards, one of which is your commander, and you can only have 1 copy of each card in that deck, except for basic lands. And of course, in standard, you can have as many basic lands as you want, but in standard you can have 4 of each card, and it's only a 60 card stack typically. I mean, you can do more, but I wouldn't suggest it. So it's so much less likely that you're going to draw the card that you put in there. Like, so you basically have to put a lot of redundancy into Commander decks, and you have to put stuff in there that you might not draw, or you have to put stuff in there that is so synergistic that no matter what cards you see in a game, stuff will work together. And then of course you have your command zone, which is loaded with things that things that you're going to see during a game, whether you've got partners or a companion thing going on. You can see that stuff during a game, but it's still not already on the field, so you don't want to build the entire deck dependent on the commander, but make sure the commander really affects the strategy. It's a really interesting format, and I like it a lot. Which the whole reason why I don't think the entire deck should be based around the commander. It should be based around a strategy that the commander is involved with, but it should not be based around the commander. And that's why it's so difficult to build a commander deck. It honestly is, because when I first started building out commander decks, that's what I did. I built the entire deck based around the commander because I found a commander that I liked, and I would do that, and I realized how bad that is, because you get to a point where people can just remove your commander and shut down your entire strategy. Oh, Jesus. So the process that I go with now is, generally speaking, I start with an idea. Sometimes I'll start with a commander. Like a recent one I started with an idea / companion, Obosh. I'm currently building an Obosh deck, and I currently have that pulled up right now. Obosh is the companion, so all the cards in the deck have to be odd mana cost. And then I'm also doing partner commanders with Obosh. It's actually really fun. I've never done a deck like this before, where I'm doing 3 things in the command zone, 2 partner commanders, and a companion. It's really, well, companions aren't technically like involved in the command zone, but you know what I mean. I've technically, companions are outside the game, and then you pay 3 mana and you get them into your hand. But anyways, so it's a really fun deck to build. I currently have a stack of 168 cards in here. None of them are lands. That's all useful cards that are synergistic with the strategy in some way. I'm clearly in the middle of building this deck because I'm still narrowing down. In fact, I haven't even really gotten down to the narrowing stage yet, where I'm getting rid of all the fat and choosing the best possible cards that are the most synergistic with the deck. But that's kind of what the process is. First, I start with an idea, or in this case, a companion or a commander or something like that. And if it's solid, then I begin to build a strategy around that. What I want, sub-strategies, like this one is going to have a dragon sub-strategy, because there's a lot of odd mana cost dragons that I can put in here, and stuff like Old Gnawbone is really good already. And, and I should mention that I have, the partner commanders are Ikra Shadiki and Vial Smasher, so it's damage type stuff. Ikra Shadiki is hard to block, Menace is going to go in for a lot of commander damage, and this is all really useful even without Obosh on the field. But Obosh is going to be really nice on the field. So that was the first step of creating this deck, and I'm using this one kind of as a guide for this video. Was I saw Obosh, I wanted to have him as a companion, so I needed to make sure that I had a commander that had at least black and red. And then I decided that once I saw Vial Smasher, and I really liked his ability, I realized, well, I could do Vial Smasher and then choose someone else to make up for some of the weaknesses that this deck is going to have, possibly. And so I eventually got to Ikra Shadiki, which I like a lot, because the combination of these basically means Vial Smasher is sitting behind on my battlefield, flinging damage at opponents. Whenever I cast my first spell each turn, he's going to fling some damage at opponents. So because of that, again, synergistic, so this is the type of stuff I think about when I think Vial Smasher. Okay, so I need instant speed type stuff, right? I don't need it, but it needs to be prominent in the deck. It's not the main focus, right? I'm not trying, again, you don't want to base the strategy off of one thing, especially not off of one commander. I have 3 things outside of the typical game that I can put in at any time. I don't want to base it off of any one of those things, but I do want to involve them. So I want to have, kind of consequently of the strategy that I'm already working on, I want to have instant speed stuff, because that way I can time my instant speed plays to play on other people's turns to make sure Vial Smasher burns them for more damage, because if I just play a whole bunch of stuff on my turn, Vial Smasher's only burning them once on my turn. But if I'm playing a spell every single turn or every other turn, that's twice to quadruple the amount of burning from Vial Smasher. And of course, not to mention that if Obosh is on the field, that doubles Vial Smasher's damage that he deals. So again, synergy. Vial Smasher naturally synergizes very well with Obosh. Then Ikra Shadiki. I know that I'm going to have a lot of direct damage type stuff, and I'm going to be doing a lot of things that could deal damage to myself too. So Ikra Shadiki being able to help me with a little bit of life gain is really nice, because I'm going to have a lot of flyers and tramples in this deck, so I'm probably going to be hitting players for a lot of damage, which means I'm going to be getting a little bit of life gain off of Ikra Shidiki, her trigger, and some commander damage off of her, which is another win condition in the deck, besides direct damage. If I'm fighting a life gain deck that's better at life gain than I am, Ikra Shidiki will help me stay alive while I fight them, and swing in for commander damage to finally get them off the field. Nice and synergistic. The three main pieces, that's the reason why I chose them the way I did. It opens up to some synergistic strategies that work well together and can all have their own win conditions. So now I'm looking into the deck, I'm looking for direct damage, right? I need to be able to deal damage to players. Trample is incredibly effective with Obosh. If I can get some expensive trample cards, they'll work with Vile Smasher. Like Old Gnawbone. Let's throw him in here. Let me look at Old Gnawbone, and I'll explain. I'll just show how he's synergistic with literally all three of the cards that I'm using from outside the game. So Old Gnawbone is a 7 mana cost card. Vile Smasher's not going to trigger from instant speed type stuff with him, but that's 7 burn damage from Vile Smasher on his own. Also, he's a 7/7 with flying, so he's not going to be as easy to block. I mean, he's going to swing in for damage, and he's going to hit occasionally, maybe not every game. I might be going up against someone with a lot of flyers, but he's going to be able to hit. And when he does, first of all, if Obosh is on the field, he's going to deal 14 damage instead of 7. Second of all, I'm going to create that many treasure tokens. So whenever a creature I control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. That's what Old Gnawbone reads. So he's synergistic with all the trample stuff that I put in the deck, because any trample creatures I have will trample over, possibly deal double damage with Obosh again, and I can make that many treasure tokens. So he's really nice to have in this deck. And again, not to mention that he's flying, and he's a 7/7 that's basically giving it lifelink if Ikra Shidiki is on the battlefield, unless, of course, because whenever the creature does combat damage to a player, you gain that much life. Not that much life. You gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So in the case of Old Gnawbone, that would be 7 life gain. I would gain 7 life regardless of whether or not I have Obosh on the field and I do 7 or I do 14 damage. I can find ways to give Old Gnawbone trample. There's a whole lot of things in this deck that are aiming towards combat damage to players, makes it super damaging, super effective, and I benefit off of it. And Ikra Shidiki will help me gain life. So that's kind of the thing of this deck, is a whole bunch of direct damage to players, more so than just burn. There is going to be burn in the deck, but it's primarily creatures dealing direct combat damage through trample and menace, death touch. I'm going to love death touch because it's a black, red, green deck. Death touch is going to make it where people don't want to block stuff. It's really nice. It's really, really nice, and I'm excited to finish making this deck. I'm just still in the process of going through the massive card base, searching through EDH Rec, searching through all sorts of stuff like that, trying to find all the cards that are very synergistic with this strategy and figuring out the perfect balance of the strategy. I'm still in that process. So that's the next step, right? So I have a lot of explaining to say. I choose commander, commanders, and companion. That comes first, regardless of whether or not I come with the idea or the commander first. So there's like a step 1 and a step 1.5 or something like that. Like step 1 is the idea of the deck, and step 1.5 is the commander. And sometimes I start at step 1.5. I skip ahead a little bit. I already have the idea, or I work backwards a little bit. Maybe those are interchangeable. Step 1 is, for some decks that I build, step 1 is the commander/companion. Step 2 is the idea of the strategy, the win conditions. And then step 2 is what I'm doing, what I'm in the process of right now for my Obosh deck, which is just EDH Rec, mana box, filtering searches, just going through the card base, finding synergistic cards as much as you can, finding your strategies, finding your sub-strategies while you do that, because you're going to notice certain commonalities between cards you get. Like, again, I was just looking through stuff and I was like, oh, there's a lot of odd mana cost dragons, and they have a lot of synergistic abilities with what I want to build anyway. So I could do this. Like, I could build a dragons as a sub-strategy, as well as mana ramp as a sub-strategy for this Jund Obosh deck. So that's what I'm doing, and that's kind of something that comes out of step 2 here, is sub strategies and like alternate win conditions and stuff like that as you begin to look through it. synergize. Then step 3 would be the thinning process, which takes forever and is really difficult and is really one of the vital steps that I struggle with sometimes, which is where you remove all the excess, the fat from the deck. Some decks like this one's currently, again, up to 168 cards. I haven't even started putting lands in it, so add 40 to that. At least that's over 200 cards right now that I'm working with to put in this deck, and it has to be exactly 100 cards. 101 kind of, because a companion doesn't count as part of the deck, so you can have 2 commanders, and my deck's gonna have 2 commanders, 98 in the deck, and then 1 companion off to the side. So technically 101 cards for this deck. But again, the companion's outside the game, so it doesn't really count. Anyways, so that's my next step after I'm done with what I'm currently doing, is the thinning process, where I have to go through and remove everything that's not the most pertinent to the strategies. Make sure, like, ask yourself the questions of when you're making the deck and when you're looking at a card and doing the thinning process. If this were in my opening hand, or if I saw this late game, anywhere in that range, how useful is this going to be? Is it useful on its own? Does it depend upon the board state? How much does it depend upon a board state? Is it so good with the board state that it's worth putting in there anyway, even though I only play it on occasion? Although that's honestly kind of rare to some extent. Is this related to a win condition, or is this something that's going to involve deck thinning? Card draw. Gotta keep card draw and mana ramp in there. That kind of stuff. It's such an intense process of balancing that takes a while to get your deck down to the perfect balance, and it involves playtesting, especially once you get down to removing like the last 10, 15 cards. That's what I find. Sometimes even just the last 5 cards, it's really difficult to decide which ones to remove and which ones to keep in, and that's where playtesting really comes in handy. So that's that step. And then comes the general editing step, which involves even more playtesting. I would say step 4 for me is the playtesting step, where I go through, I proxy the deck, I playtest it, I figure out if there's some things that just aren't working as I intended, or I didn't realize how something worked and how it could really work until I actually jump into a multiplayer setting and begin playing it, because there's just a lot of things that you really just can't account for when you're deck building that you need to test. So I proxy it, I play it, and then step 5 would be the final editing process, or that is the final editing process. Like I playtest it and change what I need to change until I think the deck is very powerful. Then I guess step 5 would be building the deck itself, just going out, getting the cards, putting it together, and then playing it and having fun with it. So it's about a 5-step process. I didn't like plan that out. It's a roughly 5-step process for me. Then there's a perpetual step 6, which is just editing the deck as I see fit, as new cards come out with new sets. Just continuing to add to it and make it stronger over time, is like a perpetual step 6, because it never really ends until I'm done with the deck and I completely tear it apart. So that's my deck building process. Now, for the channel, I'm only going to go up to step 4. I'm not going to physically build the deck. That's what I'm doing here. I don't actually want to physically build the deck. I could do that if you wanted me to, and if I were close enough. But I mean, I would have to ask you to like pay for the cards, because it's not, I can't just, build a deck. Some of these cards are expensive. Like, for example, Old Gnawbone, $40 card. It's going to be a while before I build this Obosh deck, and that's a deck that I'm building for myself for my own enjoyment. So if you wanted me to physically go to step 5 and get the physical cards for you and then just bring it to you or whatever, I would definitely need you to pay for the cards themselves. But that's not really a worry, because the extent of the plan is, and we can talk about step 5 going to that if you wanted to, but generally speaking, the plan just is submit your ideas, we'll talk, I'll help you and talk to you. I'll talk to you as I go through the steps, the process, what the deck's going to look like, and I will go up to step 4. I will play test the crap out of it and make the first official draft of the deck as good as I possibly can, and then I will make a deck tech video on it, and I'll send you the deck list, and I'll make a deck tech video on it, basically explaining all the cards, talking about all the cards I put in the deck, the full 100 or 101 deck list if you're doing companion, and the reason why it's all in there, how it works out in playing, maybe even do a video of it being played. that actually would be maybe an interesting thing. So I might actually do that too. If I mean, it's going to be proxy cards, so it wouldn't look very entertaining, but maybe I would do that as an extra thing. If you wanted me to actually build the physical deck, I would play the physical deck once or twice, maybe do some final edits before I got it to you, and that way I could post it on the channel and you could actually see what the deck does. So I guess that's another thing that needs to be said. You have to be okay with your deck becoming a deck tech that ends up on the internet, and it's not going to be like professional level deck tech. I'm not a professional level deck builder, but I do think I'm pretty good at it. I've gotten pretty good at it, and I am getting better at it with every deck that I make. And I'm also, I've gotten a really good knowledge of the card base. I'm beginning to, and I have resources to help me with that. Obviously, EDH Rec and stuff like that, but I also, the person who got me into Magic, I mean, I can ask him essentially any question, and he can think of a card that fits the strategy off the top of his head. So I have resources that will help me be able to do some deck techs here very well. I think I can make some really good decks, definitely better than some pre-builts. So just let me know. Let me know what you want, and we'll talk. I'll go up to the step 4 in the process I talked about in this video, and then from there we can talk about if you want like a step 5 or something like that. But in general, I think it'll just be step 4. I give you the deck list and you build it if you want to. You go get the cards and stuff like that. Order them on TCG Player or cardkingdom.com. I think cardkingdom.com does singles. Whatever website you want to use to order the cards themselves, or local game stores, or again, have me collect the cards for you. I can do that. I can, but it would take a while because a lot of them would have to ship in, and again, I would have to have you pay for the cards because it would be very difficult. I mean, I could do everything on TCG, get you a cart like amount and tell you how much it's gonna cost, so that way you could pay it all at once. I don't know. It's just that, again, we'll talk about that when we get to it personally. If you want me to physically build the deck for you and not just make the deck tech. But until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the comments or on Instagram with some requests.